What's going on, everybody? This is Afro Think Tank. I want to talk to the racist people real quick. The POCs who are racist towards black people and the white folks who are racist towards black people. And I just want to know if you guys have thought about the fact that being racist doesn't have a benefit anymore. And every year, the benefit of that racism that you do have gets lesser and lesser and lesser, right? And it's like I sit back and I'm thinking, because I'm watching right now, right? There was a time where, you guys had an advantage. Y'all took over the world. We understand that, right? How it went down. And then there was a time where you guys operated all the institutions that we all were forced to utilize. And because you guys had the numbers and you had the, institutional advantage, being racist was advantageous to you, right? Because racism is just tribalism, white people versus black people. It's tribalism separated by race. And then you got xenophobia, which is tribalism separated by ethnicity or nationality, right? But, by the end of this century, 40% of the global population will be African. 40%, right? Now, if you take that number, right, and you just look at all the other races, when they say Asian people are a large demographic, that includes Indians, Middle Easterners, Japanese, Chinese, Uyghurs, a whole bunch of groups of people who technically, if you look at them, they really don't, a lot of them don't got nothing in common with each other. They don't, you're just put in the category of Asian, right? But and then another thing with that, most of those populations have a demographic decline that's irreversible, even in Asia, right? There's no countries outside of Africa, and I think there's like one country that's in between, like in the Caucasus, that's doing okay, right? Some small, but their population is insignificant. So as Europeans, as your demographics go down, you being racist becomes a detriment to your survival and your ability to have a quality of life, because everywhere you go, you're going to be around a black person. At some point, when you go for a job, the person giving you that interview is going to be a black person. The person who owns that company is going to be a black person, right? When you go to the hospital, if you haven't noticed, most of your nurses are black people. Most of your doctors are black people. Look at the UK. They got so complacent. Most of the people who keep their country running and provide them services are black people, right? I don't include Arabs because there's not that many of those Arabs. I mean, they get highlighted on TV, but they're not in any way significant in the population of humankind, right? Because Arabs are just mixed mulattoes. They're just a result of black, Asians, and Africans meeting in trade routes and stuff, right? And then in between the Arabs, there is even though never acknowledged, large African population in the Arab Peninsula, right? So what happens when the African population of Africa starts to incorporate or fellowship with those Africans in the Middle East? What happens when those Africans in the Middle East start to become empowered by unifying with those Africans on the global stage? Because I'm sure those Africans who suffer through racism and discrimination culturally in the Middle East, they would love some get back. They would love to elevate in society. And so the fact that Middle Eastern countries are forced to do business with Africans because there's no resources in that desert, that oil is going to run out at some point. Then what, right? So the Middle East is going to need Africa, Africans' resources, and African businesses, and African labor, because they don't have a population to run their country. So eventually, the population of Africa is going to spill out onto the world to make up the people difference in all these places, right? Because here's the thing. There are 1.4, conservatively, billion Africans on the continent, right? And there are over hundreds of millions, right? Over 200 million African diasporas in the Western Hemisphere already, right? And then there's untold amount of Africans in Asia who are not recognized, by the way, but at some point they're going to come online once they have the ability to leverage themselves, right? China, right? Like if they were, I see them trying to change their racism is based off the homogenous societies that they have and the propaganda from the white Europeans and their lack of knowledge of who Africans are, right? I see them changing a little bit. I see them embracing, you go to, even though their racism is not like white hatred racism, right? But even China knows, and their government has a plan to somehow convince the Chinese people that we need to bring in a lot Africans to make up for the shortness of labor, because most of those Chinese people are old, elderly. They're about to die out, right? So there's not enough people in China, despite them having 1 billion people, to continue on with their civilization. And you need people to produce money for the state. If you don't have people to produce money for the state fails. You get me? So China, like we heard a couple years ago, they have an initiative to foster trade with Africa, to bring workers to China, to add to the people, that adds to the tax revenue that keeps their country running, right? Same thing with Japan. Japan, they're going extinct. They also have an initiative. Now, obviously, Japanese people want Japan to stay Japanese, right? And I understand that, just like Europeans want Europe to stay European. And I understand that. I want Africa to stay African. Africa for the Africans, Asia for the Asians, Europe for the Europeans. And it should be the Americas for the Indians, right? That's the way it should be, right? But here's the problem with like Europe. Europe, you guys have a population decline. So what that means is, as much as you guys are practicing your racism because, somewhat quasi-justified, but that has to do with your white political leaders and their policies that disenfranchise you Europeans because they don't want to hire you or pay you because they're so greedy. So they rather import foreigners from other countries to do the jobs that you could do, right? But they want to do it. They don't want to pay you. They want to pay them cheaper, right? But the side effect of that is that now you have all these black Africans in Europe, right, taking these jobs that you guys don't want to do, by the way. And I know why you don't want to do it, because you can't live off that. That's not enough money for you to live. And who wants to do that kind of labor and not get paid decently, at least? Because if they paid you decently, you would do it, right? But because that's the situation we find ourselves in, capitalism, Western capitalism, you guys have a demographic decline that if you were to eliminate, if all Africans and Arabs were to go back to their original countries, your problem would still remain. As a matter of fact, it would exacerbate your country's problem to the point where you guys couldn't even function as a society. Your states would become failed because you couldn't generate the tax revenue to fund your state and federal governments to operate anything that you got going on. Your corporations would fail because they have nobody buying their products or utilizing their services because there's not enough of you to do that, to keep your countries rich. You would become poor, right? Your infrastructure would crumble, right? You guys would have no health care. You couldn't afford it. You wouldn't have any doctors. You wouldn't have engineers. Like you guys, that's what would happen if you eliminated all the foreigners, right? So if you still want England to be England, France to be France, Belgium to be Belgium, Poland to be Poland, if you want all that to happen, you have legitimately no choice but to allow Africans, the only pool of human resources that's available on the planet, to do it, right? So it's like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. Same with Asia. Yes, I'm sure the Japanese would love to keep Japan Japanese. But what's going to happen is you can stay Japanese all the way to the last man, all the way to the failed state, all the way to crumbling infrastructure, right? Or you can import, dramatically change your demographic, and your country would still exist, but it would no longer belong to you, right? It would belong to the Africans who would become the new citizens, and the new Japanese would be African, right? That's what's going to happen, right? And that goes for the Middle East as well, right? It's going to be hard pressed for you to keep treating Africans like shit when your population becomes smaller and smaller, less richer, less resources, less capabilities to effectively do anything. Your militaries that you use to protect your nations, they will be filled with Africans. Look at France and Europe. Their militaries are filled with Africans, right? So at some point, it's going to be just clownish to be racist when you're the minority. I mean, most of y'all, the Europeans, you guys are already a minority, but now you guys didn't know that. But now y'all starting to know that, and Africans didn't know that. Now we're starting to know that. So everybody's perspective is changing. So how can you, as a minority, who nations can't finance and fund themselves, whose race cannot reproduce themselves, how can you possibly be racist to the only people that can at least save your countries, you know, even though you guys won't be there to enjoy the rebuilding of your country? Like, it's good. It's like, you're literally stuck between a rock and a hard place. And when we're talking about the colonies like America, right? America is 5% of the world's population, right? 5, that's nothing. That's insignificant, even though we have all the money because of obviously slavery, right? Black people. So if you take black people out of the equation of America, America wouldn't exist. It would still be different nations of Native Americans thriving, right? They would probably be a large population that probably be thriving. They would have their own cities, states, and they'd be dealing with their own internal political things over here, right? But that's not the case because Native Europeans killed most of them, right? And Native Americans are not large enough to replace their population because of the genocide. That continues to happen, by the way, right? So in America, we don't have enough people to run the economies. The only thing keeping America running is the large African-American population on the East Coast, right? And the other all the populations in all the major cities on the coastline that produces all the money. Because the thing is, all the Democratic states where all the black people live are the ones that generate the revenue that subsidize all those European states in the middle of America, Midwest and all that. Like all the Republican white, 95% white, 89% white states, all those states are welfare states that get all of their subsidized funding from this Democratic states that just so happen to be filled with a bunch of black people who work and generate the revenue the same way we've been generating the revenue as since we're still the economic engine, right, of America. Right. And if you were to take African Americans, right, and make it a group in America, and then you were to separate all the demographics of America, you put the Polish people over here, you put the Germans, because all Europeans, Americans are not the same. Right. If we really were to break things up, right, we know that Africans are all West African, Nigeria, Ghana, Burkina Faso, Mali, that area. Right. One big glob, same different ethnic groups, but all racially the same. But you Europeans technically are not. Right. And there's a lot of people that get to be in the European category that are not European. Like Arabs are considered European. A lot of Latinos who are not European are considered European. So your numbers in America are actually skewed, right? That may help your psyche, but in the real world, it doesn't help. So in America, demographically, African Americans are the richest and largest single ethnic group compared to all the other ethnic groups, right? That's why the people that do know stop us from voting, because in actuality, if African American people understood that they are in fact the largest demographic and they acted upon that, we would literally take over government. If we had our faculties together, we could take over everything. Why is it that supposed 13% of America's population can destroy corporations simply by boycotting? Since when does 15% of anything really have much of an effect? 10% of your church, they say you pay 10% of your tithes, add 5 to that, right? That's supposed to be nothing. As a matter of fact, your mortgage is supposed to only be, 15% of your incomes? That's the way it was supposed to be, the American dream. So that's supposed to be nothing. So technically, 15% of America's population should be technically nothing, right? But for some reason, we're so important, our 15%, that's why I think we're much larger, right? But even conservatively, our 15% has so much power, right, that the government and certain political parties have to commit physical violence in order to stop us from voting. Like millions of dollars are spent to stop us from participating in the political process, right? And throughout, decades, throughout 100 years, why didn't they want to vote? If we were that small of a population, it shouldn't even matter if we vote, right? And if we're so poor, why do we have such a large spending power? The only other people in America that has a bigger spending power than us are white people, European Americans, who consist of Arabs, Latinos who want to be white, other people who check white, and various different type of Europeans who culturally and ethnically are different, right? So I'm just saying it's just not very advantageous to be racist, because at some point it's just going to be us. So, I mean, tell me what y'all think about this in the comment section. All right, because, it's coming up pretty quick, y'all. It's coming up pretty quick. It's going to just be us. Then what y'all going to do? Because we're going to own everything and run everything because you need us. Either you do it or else. Either way, the future's black. Anyway, that's all I got to say. Afro Think Tank. Learn something, teach something. I'm out.
Free Sudan! Boycott diamonds and gold! Free Sudan! Boycott diamonds and gold! We most definitely cannot forget about the people of Sudan.
Thanks for watching Afro Think Tank. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And follow me on Substack and Patreon for more content. Remember, it's Pan-Africanism or nothing.